fine, really it's alright. I'll keep taking punches until your arms get tired.
So I'm out here beating my head against the wilderness as usual, and the wilderness is winning. But one of the problems I deal with are a lot of vines, and you can see they've just taken over a lot of the trees here. They're destroying it. They're destroying whole areas of the forest. Some of them are little, like this guy, and some of them are really huge, like this thing. You know, play Tarzan on this, but they're really rough. They do a number on you. But I yank these out of the trees. You cut them and you yank them. Sometimes you don't have a knife or a clippers or something with you, so you yank on them, and you find that these vines have tremendous strength in one direction. But if you violate that, right, snap and shear, they just bust up. So if you don't have a tool, you can't yank them. You just go up, even if they're real supple, you pull them in half, crack them, and then you strip them. What does that have to do with martial arts? A lot, actually, because most of the problems we're going to confront, strength is going to have a given focal point, a plane that it operates in. You know, if an attacker comes and confronts you, he's working usually on a fairly, tight beam, right? It's not all over the place. He may be flailing, but that's a singular type of attack that usually goes in a single direction. Our trick is not to confront that power directly, right? The little pithy proverb there from the folksy wisdom, life is simpler if you plow around the stump, is exactly like that. There's no reason to confront power directly, and yet people do it all the time, not just in self-defense, but in life. We're constantly, I look back, I like to do sort of a forensic analysis of things you do wrong, and if you live long enough, you do a lot of things wrong, and so you look at it, and very often it's because your approach was just on the same plane. You're fighting conflict directly instead of, avoiding it, letting it dissipate in the right way, finding an oblique angle on that, and there's so many instances where this appears. In my bouncing days, I used to see this all the time, and I began thinking about, well, how can you, use what's around you, or just change the circumstance of the situation so that it went your way with the minimum friction. Here's a story this goes back, half a lifetime ago. But I'm working one night, bouncing at a dance hall, bar. It was an elaborate place. There were a lot of different customers there. And these two guys start getting into it in the parking lot. These were big guys. These guys, man, they must have both been somewhere between 2 1/4, 2 1/2, 250 pounds. They were big boys. And so they get into a parking lot. It's a summer evening, and they're literally face to face. They're so mad at each other, they're like a ball player when they're yelling at the ump, and they just get in their face. They're literally bumping chests. They've got on their shirts. They must have been somewhere, pretty fancy, because they're actually, they're in button-down shirts and they're bumping chests like this, and they're out there, and I can remember going, well, do you want to box or do you want to wrestle? Back in the days, those were the options. Martial arts, I was a black belt by this time, but it wasn't nearly as prevalent like it is now. So boxing, wrestling, this is what these guys knew, and they're so mad they're trying to figure it out, and they get into it, and they start flailing. They're both whapping away at each other. Big enough to do damage, but not skilled enough to make it work. So they really weren't hurting each other, but they're thumping away. And I remember see them smack each other, and in the lights of the parking lot, I can see these white objects, a few white objects sort of spiraling up into the light, coming down and bouncing on the pavement. I think to myself, my God, their teeth. These guys must be doing a lot more damage than I thought. I was impressed for a while. And then I go over and I look and I realize it's buttons. They're grabbing each other's shirts and these buttons are spraying around. I thought it was teeth. Anyway, the upshot of it is it goes from flail, thump, thump, nothing happens. They start grabbing, which happens really quick. This is within seconds. They're grabbing each other, and pretty soon they're hugging each other. Over they go onto the ground, and they're gassed out in no time. They run out of energy. Within, I would say, 30 seconds, they were pretty much cooked. And nobody got hurt. They wound up picking themselves out of the dust. Once they were completely exhausted, apparently Honor was satisfied, and away they go with, filled with kumbaya and bonhomie, off to, I don't know what, probably get more drinks someplace else because they couldn't come back into the place I was working. Well, that's an example of two really inefficient fighters going at it directly instead of finding another way. Let me give you one more quick example. It's one of my favorite stories of bouncing because it worked out so well for me. Not everything did, but this worked out real well. So one night I'm on the door. By being on the door, I mean my job is to check and make sure that everybody that comes in is of age, legal age, so you card them. And these three young guys come in, pretty strapping lads, and how old I don't know. My job was to card them because I couldn't tell for sure, but they were probably of age, but maybe not. Anyway, they saw me working the door alone and not knowing anything about me one way or another, were disinclined to show me ID, and they thought they were going to breeze on by. So my job was to figure out, what do you do now, right? So they want to say no. My job is to say yes, and to figure out how to make this happen. So I could have confronted them directly and gotten into them with it. Three guys, not really my best, not the way I want the night to go. To take three guys, somebody's got to get hurt pretty bad, pretty fast. And even then, it gets dicey. So I'm looking around for alternatives. And I see a fellow at the bar. There were a couple of bars in this establishment, but I see him at the bar. And we'll say his name is Pete. This guy was really an interesting fellow. He was a grave digger at the time. And he loved to talk. He would talk endlessly about the conditions of the soil and this and that. So he'd bend his ear about soil. But what really got his boat floating was fishing. This guy loved fishing. So if you talk to Pete about fishing, he'd go on for hours about that. And so there was a price to pay to get him talking about fishing. But anyway, I got these three guys standing in front of me, getting ready to play the game. And I look over and I see Pete. He stands about 6'8", is just huge. Good looking guy, like, almost movie star handsome, kind of like a big Clint Walker. And he's just, everything about this guy's enormous. He's got hands that just dwarf me. He's drinking over at the bar and I go, "Hey Pete, how's fishing?" Pete hops up, he's got a beer in his hand. His hand is so big, it sweeps around this beer can. Have you ever seen the little V8 cans, those tiny little things round like that, where you can just wrap your hand around it? He makes a regular beer can look like one of these tiny V8 things. He just comes over and he's got this thing in his paw. He's completely oblivious to what's going on. The dynamic between me and these three guys is unknown to him. He doesn't know. He comes over, he thinks he's going to talk about bass. Lays one of those meaty forearms on the rail, right between there's like pool tables here. And so he's right next to me. He's not even looking at the guys, but he's facing them. He's got his arm down there. His arm is the size of my thigh, and he's got this hand with a beer can in there. And he starts talking about, well, where are the bass biting? Oh, and Pete starts yammering about the bass. And I look at him and I smile, and I look at the guys and I smile with the eyebrows. They look at me and they look at him, see the beer can in that arm and just go, turn around and go out. I was real happy about that. I had to listen to the fishing conditions for about the next 2.5 hours, but it was worth it. And that was a great, way to defuse the situation and not have to get into it. So I didn't approach the power directly, and I thought that was a great thing. There was something out there I could use, I just did it, and I slipped into it a different way. So, same game.
A penny for my thoughts, you say. You can keep the change. If they're truth or if they're fiction, they're worth about the same. And if it's a lie you're after, I'll go put on that mask.